Hello, welcome to Biblical Worldview. We are going to talk about a very serious subject today and one that people need to hear. The word on this needs to get out. And just a trigger warning in advance, some of it is pretty graphic, but it is something that is absolutely destroying many of today's youth. And it deals with the idea of gender identity, and I'm not going to waste time. I'm just going to get right into it. I thought of maybe splitting this into two sessions, but you could always pause it, come back. It's really just one whole talk revealing the really dark and devastating world of gender ideology and transgender ideology and how it is destroying the lives of our young people that we should be protecting. Ephesians chapter 4, verses 14 and 15, it says, "Then we will no longer be immature like children. We won't be tossed and blown about by every wind of new teaching. We will not be influenced when people try to trick us with lies so clever they sound like the truth." Those are the best lies. The ones that are so clever they sound like the truth. That's why when we hear certain narratives, we need to engage our critical thinking, the God-given brains that we have, and question those narratives. He says, "Instead, we will speak the truth in love, growing in every way more and more like Christ, who is the head of his body, the church." In other words, we need to be truth speakers. To speak the truth, you must know the truth. So we have to start with what is true. But when we do it, we need to do it lovingly. And, we need to ask that question. What does that look like to speak the truth in love? Most importantly, we need to speak the truth. And then second, we need to do it lovingly. Not speaking the truth is not loving. And if we think about God, the Bible says that God is love. When we think of loving others, love your neighbor as yourself. That's the second of the greatest commandment. Love your neighbor as yourself. Well, how do we love our neighbors? What does that look like? And many people, they will say, well, you need to affirm a person's gender identity. That's what loving looks like. That certainly sounds good, but we have to ask the question, is that the most loving possible thing that we can do? We're going to talk about that. First, I want to talk about cults. Cults are very tricky things, but cults, I'm not just talking about cults like the Jonestown cult where they drank a bunch of Kool-Aid and died, or, crazy, crazy, crazy fringe cults, but cults are mind control groups, typically religious. And it's important to understand how cults work because we're going to be talking about the cult of transgenderism or the cult of gender ideology. That's what it is. And has a high priest named John Money, or a prophet, a false prophet. Cults work like this. First, they find vulnerable marks, people that are really going through a difficult time, struggling, and then they tell them this is the answer. I went through a time like that and I struggled too, and then I discovered X. I discovered Scientology and it changed my life. And so you find somebody who's really going through a crisis and a difficult time, and then you approach them. And initially, when they get sucked into that group, they're love bombed. They are given such approval, such praise. You made the best decision of your life. So there's this initial love bombing, which just feeds our ego, feeds this sense of wanting to belong and feel accepted within us. And then when there is the desired behavior is performed, there's affirmation and celebration of that behavior. A group I used to belong to, they were very legalistic, and women in that group had to wear long, long dresses. They could not wear pants. They could not cut their hair. They could not wear makeup. They could not wear jewelry other than a wedding ring. And people who went outside of that were looked down upon. And yet when you have the right behaviors, that behavior is celebrated and affirmed. In transgenderism, that might look like a girl who is vulnerable and really struggling with some mental health issues and difficulties, a lot of times coming from puberty. I mean, that is a very difficult time of life. I'm going to get to that. But then imagine in many cases where I've listened to the stories of people that have transitioned, realized it was a mistake, and then detransitioned, they'll initially get on Tumblr, or they'll get on places online that affirm them, and they'll say, just, try being a boy, just try cutting your hair and see what that looks like. So they'll cut their hair like a boy, whatever that means. And then they'll get so much affirmation. You look so good. This is so good. And then they do the next behavior and the next behavior. They get so much positive affirmation and acceptance that there is a real psychological trick here. There's a lot of repetition of false facts that support that belief system, supposed facts. I'll go through many of those in the transgender ideology cult. There's separation from family and non-cult influences. A lot of people, when they start and they get into a cult, the other cult members will tell them, when you come out and you tell your family your new beliefs, they're going to say all of these things. They're going to push back this way. And then when that happens, it's just affirmation that you're in the right place, that the cult, oh, they knew my parents would say this. And they separate you, and they replace your family. They become your new family. If you ask questions, if you pause, if you hesitate, then you are shunned, and it's looked down upon, and you get negative reinforcement when you ask questions, and you try to put the brakes on and say, wait, I don't understand this. This doesn't sound right. This doesn't feel right. You will get pushback. And then if you start leaving the cult, or you start really asking serious questions, there's ostracization. You get shunned. You get access removed. You are told the people that are still in will completely remove you. People you once counted as friends will no longer be friends, because you are no longer part of that family. And then you'll get hate bombed and maligned on social media and all kinds of other places for leaving. So those are many ways that cults work. The thing with gender ideology is a lot of people are pretending like this is somehow makes sense, or this somehow always existed. Nobody ever thought of this. For thousands of years, there have been two biological sexes. Gender is a recent made-up phenomenon. And it comes from critical theory. I talked about critical race theory in another video, which comes from Marxism. All critical theories come from Marxism. I explained that in another video. You can watch that video like 3 videos ago. But from critical theory comes critical gender theory and queer theory. The whole idea is deconstructing the whole idea of sex and gender norms and gender roles. And these theories are founded by sexual predators, pedophiles, child mutilation, torture, fetish junkies. Just to give you an example, and I'll talk more about John Money in a moment, but John Money was the pioneer of the idea of gender identity. He invented the whole idea of gender as something separate from sex. And he was given a clinic at Johns Hopkins University, of all places. And there he did unspeakable experiments and things I will tell you about. But even in the most well-known association, the association that sets the standards of care for gender affirmation, is called WPATH, the World Professional Association of Transgender Healthcare. Many of the people that have fed into the Standards of Care Volume 8, or the 8th iteration of their Standards of Care, the updated version, are people who have gotten off. They've been in this place called the Eunuch Archives, which was a Usenet forum, and they're in forums where they submit stories of pornographic child mutilation and castration, and they have a sexual fetish with these things. Two of them are Johnson and Wasserberg. You look them up yourself. I'm not going to spend forever, but they are people who have these extreme fetishes. They have a sexual attraction to the idea of boys having their testicles removed. It's insane. And yet they have given input into these WPATH standards that are pushed all around the world and say we need to affirm kids. And they have encouraged them, and now in their 8th iteration of the WPATH standards of care, they recognize eunuch as a gender identity. It's absolutely totally sick. And this idea, all of these things, critical gender theory, queer theory, it's come out of colleges, it's being pushed in schools. And so in schools, a lot of states have allow kids to transition their gender without their parents' consent. And the idea that if parents don't use the right pronouns, if they don't consent, if they don't go along with this, then they don't love their kids. They should be separated from their kids. In a lot of cases, child protective services or whatever that is in a particular state are called in, and kids are removed from the home just because parents are not going along with this. And there are abusive practices involved in this. And there's also this idea that thousands of years of tradition needs to be upended instantly. This is not like a slow progression where we've learned these things. It's a complete upending of tradition that needs to happen as fast as possible. This is a radical, destructive ideology. So going back to John Money, it says, I took this from a website called Redux. I'll share the link on the bottom. But they talk about John Money and his history. And I'll tell you a story about him in a minute. But it says in a 1991 interview for the journal, Money is quoted as saying, "If I were to see the case of a boy aged 10 or 11 who's intensely erotically attracted toward a man in his 20s or 30s, that is a child who has attraction to an older adult." And a lot of times it's because they've been groomed or sexually abused in some way. He says that the relationship is totally mutual and the bonding is genuinely totally mutual, then I would not call it pathological in any way. In fact, he fought, and many of these people keep fighting to get the age of consent lowered from like 16 to 12 or as low as the law will legally allow it. All they think that is required is consent. Money also noted that he never reported any pedophiles to the police. In any of his practices where adults were found to be pedophiles and predators on children, he never reported them to the police, even those who were actively abusing children, due to his belief that adult-child sex was normal and often beneficial. So there was a case with the Reimer twins. There were parents, the Reimers, who had twin boys born. At about 6 months, one of the twins was having urinary tract issues. And so they were given a circumcision that was totally botched, and their penis was just messed up. And so they were worried about sexual function and things like that later in the child's life. And so the parents went to the expert at Johns Hopkins, John Money. John Money believes that gender, who he invented the idea of gender identity as something completely distinct from biological sex. He believes gender is completely socially constructed. There is no biological connection. Boys are boys because they are taught to be boys by their environment, by their parents. Girls are taught to be girls, but they could be taught otherwise. And so he saw the solution to this and proposed it to the parents, and because he was the expert and they listened, he had the boy's penis removed and testicles removed. He basically made the boy a girl. Not really, not in real life, because you can't make a boy a girl, but he did surgeries to make the boy as girl-like as possible and unboy-like as possible, and then told the parents never indicate to this child in any way. His name was Bruce Reimer. Never indicate, never use his old name, never indicate that he is anything but a girl. Unfortunately, this boy was a boy. Just removing his parts did not make him a girl. Just them referring to him as a girl did not make him a girl. He was a boy. That's the way he was born. And not only did John Money do this, it says during checkups, Money would subject the twin boys to disturbing experiments. This is bad. They were forced to replicate sexual intercourse with each other, touch and inspect each other's genitals, and watch pornography. Money would show the twins photos from smut magazines and explicit sexual photos of kids. He would then prod them about their sexual arousal and question their attractions. The children were also expected to comply in front of audiences of as many as 6 other adults, and some reports state Money also took photos and videos of the children engaged in rehearsed sexual activity. At the time, both of the twins were just 6 years old, and the other twin, the one who didn't go through this medical transition, thought he had a sister. Later testimony from one of the twins stated that Money had 2 sides to his personality, one when their parents were around and one when they were alone. When alone with the children, Money was abusive and got irate with them. for refusing to perform for him. In a later statement, they both recall fearing he would whoop them if they did not do as he asked and strip their clothes. So Money was a sick, twisted sexual predator, and Money called these experiments that he did on Bruce Reimer a success. Well, later on, when Bruce went through puberty, he realized, he's like, this is not working. There's something totally wrong. And he pressed his parents, and his parents admitted the truth. Once his brother realized that his sister, that he thought was a sister, was actually a boy, and all this focus was on Bruce for so long, it really messed him up. He got into drug addiction. He ended up dying from an overdose. They don't know whether it was accidental or purposeful at 36 years old. And then Bruce, who had a girl name, and then decided he wanted his name to be David when he transitioned back to becoming a boy, which he can never be fully, at least in a sexual aspect, ended up killing himself at the age of 38. And the parents attributed their deaths to John Money and this amazingly sick, perverted, twisted experiments. And these experiments were deemed to be a success by John Money and were perpetrated on many, many other children. So transgender activism, it has basically a narrative. It's a story that's shared and repeated so often that people just automatically assume it and believe it. And a lot of these progressive Marxist ideologies are very story-based. So the first is gender is a social construct. And many people have a disconnect between their bodies and brains. They'll say, I was born in the wrong body, or I'm a boy's body with a girl's brain. That's what they'll say. There's no evidence of any of this, by the way. They'll say there is. There's not. Trans people have always existed, but have been afraid to come out until now. In other words, there's always been trans people. I believe there have been people with gender dysphoria or gender identity disorder, people who have struggled with their gender identity and wished maybe they were something else. Those people ought to be treated with compassion. I mean, it has to be a really difficult life living like that. But they would say the numbers that are in existence today have always existed. And that is just not the case. If one's perceived gender is not affirmed, it has a very high probability of leading to suicide. In other words, if somebody is a boy, biological male, and they all of a sudden decide, I'm a female, they have to be immediately affirmed. Or they're going to be at very high risk of suicide. 50% of transgender people kill themselves or attempt to commit suicide. That's the statistic that's thrown around. There's this idea of dead naming. In other words, if you accidentally or purposefully use a person's the name they were given, that's called dead naming, because that name should no longer exist. Or if you misgender them. In other words, if a boy says, I want to be called Sheila, and I have she, her pronouns, or I am non-binary and I have they, them pronouns, and you accidentally use the correct biological pronouns, that's misgendering them, and you are committing an act of violence against them. And you are leading to them committing suicide. It's seen as very, very hateful, but we'll see if that's true. Anyone who doesn't affirm is a transphobe. In other words, to love someone else means you have to give 100% affirmation to however they feel. Parents who don't affirm do not really love their children. They should be replaced. They should be replaced by the government. Kids are pulled out of their homes by Child Protective Services in many cases, or they are separated. They are told by their teachers, by guidance counselors, by people online if they have the great misfortune of getting into online chat forums and Tumblr and things like that. TikTok, that they need to run away from their parents, they need to leave their parents, they need to separate from themselves from their parents because their parents are not being loving. And parents are being emotionally abused, and so are their children. And the line that is used is, would you rather have a dead daughter or a living trans son? Or would you rather have a living trans daughter or a dead son? In other words, if you don't affirm your children, use their pronouns, say yes to everything, every feeling and whim that they have, they are going to kill themselves. That's a lie. Children and adults with gender dysphoria, it was previously called gender identity disorder, but it was updated in the most recent Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, are extremely fragile, and they need to be told how fragile they are and protected. In other words, Trans kids are so fragile, and if you say the wrong thing or you do the wrong thing, they're going to kill themselves. Now, suicide is something that is absolutely dreadful. It should be taken very seriously, and statistics should not be abused by that very same measure. But when you tell kids how fragile they are and you reinforce the concept to children that if you're not affirmed, most of the trans kids kill themselves if they're not affirmed, you're putting this idea in their head. The Centers for Disease Control recommend very much against doing that kind of thing. And it says they found clusters of suicides where kids hear about suicide and they think about suicide, and then they find someone else who commits suicide because of this. They're led down that path. This ideology is very contagious. Finally, we should always follow a child's lead regarding treatments that will always follow a child's lead. If the child feels a certain way, we need to follow their lead. We need to do what they say. We need to do what they ask. We need to affirm their feelings. I don't know when else on earth you would ever do this. But in this one area, you should affirm them, which regarding the treatments that they will want that will render them sterile for the rest of their life, unable to have children, maimed, maybe maimed for the rest of their lives with body mutilation, the surgeries, so-called gender-affirming surgeries, and that we should follow this course as quickly as possible without question or further investigation into other factors. This is the narrative. So, is it true that trans people have always existed in great numbers? No. In fact, people who have gone to the doctors and identified as transgender have always been male. There's no data going back over 15 years of transgender females. Transgender boys were like 0.01%, like 1 in 10,000 boys have this gender dysphoria. And I don't want to say transgender boys because you cannot be transgender. In other words, your sex, your biological sex is your biological sex that cannot be changed. But the spike, what has really been shocking to people, and Abigail Schreier wrote a book about this called Irreversible Damage, is the sudden, not like kids, always kids that were struggling with gender identity were kids like a boy who liked to wear girls' clothes and liked to maybe have long hair and identified more feminine from a very, very young age. But what they noticed is something psychologist Lisa Littman calls rapid onset gender dysphoria. In other words, they hit the age of puberty, sometimes just before puberty, and all of a sudden, boom, a switch goes off and they're coming home and telling their parents they're another gender and they need these other pronouns. And so the Tavistock Clinic in the United Kingdom, it's in London, took all of England's gender identity dysphoria referrals. And they noticed just from 2009 until 2016, a 4,000% increase in girls identifying as transgender. In New Zealand, there's another study that shows basically the same thing. This is not a study, this is not a trend that has impacted, it's impacted boys, sure, but it's far more impacted girls in very, very powerful and very, very negative ways. And there's reasons for that. And so the question is this rapid onset gender dysphoria, if it's just the result, this surge of social acceptance, like trans identities are more socially accepted now, therefore more people feel safe coming out as trans. If that's the case, where's the surge in the adult community? It doesn't exist. You would think all of these adults who have been living their lives and suppressing and having suicidal ideation, suppressing their true gender identity all these years, now that it's accepted, they would be coming out. They've just been waiting. Well, where are they? They don't exist because this surge is the result of a social contagion and not an actual thing, a destructive social contagion that many people are affirming. And the other thing is, you would then expect, as acceptance is increasing, teen suicide rates to go down. But suicide rates for kids ages 10 to 14, where puberty begins, has tripled in the last 10 years. It doesn't make any sense. You would think that those who have been suppressing their real gender for decades would be relieved to finally let it out, and yet they are very, very few and far between. There's this idea, teens, I played role-playing games when I was young. In a role-playing game, you can be another character in another fantasy land. It started with maybe Dungeons and Dragons or something like that, but then it became online, and things like World of Warcraft, you can become any character you want. If I want to be a girl paladin or a holy warrior or a magic user, or you could be any class. I could be an orc. They have green skin and they're very ugly, but I could be a troll female. I could be a elf with blue hair. I think that's pretty cool. I really liked playing games like that. But the problem is people can get sucked into this fantasy world and it impacts their life, thinking I can be whatever I want. And that has an influence. And there's this idea, children, we don't want children to suffer, but we feel like if something is wrong, if children are going through anxiety and stress, if children are, or teens are, kids going through puberty, and they have this feeling, I shouldn't feel like this, something is wrong. And if I do X, it will meet that need that I have. And everyone, and by X, I'm just saying a random variable. In this case, it's becoming trans or saying I'm non-binary or anything other than cis, C-I-S. Cisgender is a made-up prefix that basically means you identify as the biological sex that you are. That is looked down on in today's teen culture, being cis heteronormative. In other words, you don't have some special oppression. So they see people like transitioning, they watch I Am Jazz, or they watch people online that have YouTube channels and a lot of followers saying what a great thing this is, transitioning. Well, what else are they going to say? Are they suddenly going to change their minds and say, I've made a horrible mistake? We'll talk about that too. But those people seem happy and fulfilled, and I want to be happy and fulfilled. It's hard to understand. We don't want our kids to suffer, but the teen years are very difficult, and especially for girls. It has tremendous impacts. They go through puberty. There's so many changes to their bodies. I don't have to tell you, girls get their periods. It impacts girls a lot more than it impacts boys. And a lot of times they go through depression and all these hormonal changes and trying to fit in and see where I fit and developing breasts, and boys all of a sudden noticing them and checking them out. A lot of them have been exposed to pornography at young ages, seeing women humiliated and abused by men, thinking this is what it means to be a girl. And they're trying to find, where is my place? Where do I belong? And then they come up against this power of suggestion. So kids, they go to school, maybe they feel alone, they don't know where they fit in, but they see like the heroes of their school are these kids that come out as trans. And they know if they do that, they automatically get social acceptance. And so there's a powerful social component to this. And they're not taught the beauty and the power of being a woman. In fact, if you're a woman, you could have trans women, biological males, competing against you in sports and not being able to do anything about it. Or having your personal spaces, bathrooms, locker rooms, changing areas invaded by people with penises and male chromosomes. So as a result of this, there's been a 4,000% increase in gender dysphoria referrals in Western countries. Here's the Mayo Clinic's definition of gender dysphoria. Gender dysphoria might cause adolescents and then adults to experience a marked difference between inner gender identity and assigned gender, we'll talk about that too, that lasts for at least 6 months. So there's some kind of a difference between and it's basically, you have to have two of the following. And my point is, I think almost everybody has had two or some of these. So a difference between gender identity and genitals or secondary sex characteristics. Secondary sex characteristics are those characteristics that develop at puberty, not at birth. And so if you don't like the fact that you are developing breasts, if you don't like the fact that you're having a period or getting pubic hair and things like that, you don't like that your voice is changing if you're a guy, if you don't like that you're getting facial hair, you, boom, you just checked off one of these boxes. In young adolescents, the difference between gender identity and anticipated secondary sex characteristics. So if you're a girl and you don't want what comes along with puberty, then boom, you checked off one. A strong desire to be rid of these genitals or secondary sex characteristics, or a desire to prevent the development of them. Well, boom, you just checked off two boxes if you don't like having your period. A strong desire to have the genitals and sex characteristics of another gender. I remember my wife telling me a story of when she was a kid. She was friends with a boy, a bunch of kids in the neighborhood, and she always was jealous at the fact that a boy could just stand in the bushes and pee, and she had to go, how girls do it. A strong desire to be treated as another gender, or a strong belief of having the typical feelings and reactions of another gender. It's very easy to check off two of these boxes. This is ridiculous. And so they mentioned gender assigned at birth. Here's an outstanding clue. These people say, oh, this is what the science says. We should just believe biology and the science. This is not scientific. This is not informed by actual biologists, experts, or maybe if it's biologists, ones who are afraid of being canceled, or experts of any kind other than gender ideology activists. Those are the ones that are pushing this. And weak people who are afraid of being canceled, fired, losing tenure, things like that, won't push back and state the truth. It's like the story of the Emperor's New Clothes. You can read it for yourself if you don't know the story. Hans Christian Andersen, this is a great example. But they use this term, sex assigned at birth. Anywhere you see that word, you can be certain that nobody is following science, because your sex is not assigned at birth. It is determined at fertilization. If you are a girl, you have two X chromosomes. In all cases, if you're a boy, you have an X and a Y chromosome. And you cannot have an XX chromosome body and an XY chromosome brain. If you're a girl, all your chromosomes, every cell in your brain has XX chromosomes. If you're a boy, every cell in your brain has XY chromosomes. Sure, there are anomalies. There are birth defects. There are, things outside of the norm, but things outside of the norm don't change what the norm is. The fact that humans are born with kidneys does not make somebody not a human, or with two kidneys does not make someone not a human if they only have one kidney. It just makes them a human being that is outside the norm. So sex is determined at fertilization. You cannot change it in any way. It's impossible. And it's identified at birth. Not assigned at birth, it's identified. When they see the little wee-wee, it's a boy. Or it's identified by ultrasound, sonogram, a DNA test. How do they know? You cannot change your sex. And so a person who is going through gender dysphoria, like any other struggle that teens or children or people may go through, they can't change their body, but they can change their feelings and the way they think, and that is how they should be treated. And so that's great news. Somebody that says, oh, my brain, I have a girl brain and a boy body, that's not true. But their brain, the way they think, can be changed. Their body cannot be changed. You can cut things off. You can perform genital mutilation on them, and these horrible, life-altering surgeries that will never truly fix the problem. You can do that, but that's not going to make them the other sex. It cannot be changed. It is what it is. The best thing you can do is therapy, love them, care for them, and align the way they think with the biological reality, like any other kind of therapy. So now when facts or statistics are shared supporting the affirmation model, so they'll say, oh, 50% of people are killing themselves. Would you rather have a live son or a dead live trans son or a dead daughter? All they are doing is simply repeating activist claims and confirmation bias studies. In other words, studies where the data is just cherry picked. They're looking for the studies that show what they want to show, and not actual solid scientific peer-reviewed research. Gender identity experts, quote unquote experts, are just activists in gender identity. They're not anyone that we should listen to. Their goal is to push this gender identity ideology. So realize that, first of all, when people claim to be experts, pushback. Facts are facts. You cannot change facts. If an expert's saying sex assigned at birth, they're an activist and not an expert. So don't be an activist, be a factivist. So the standards of care, the basic standards of care I shared before was WPATH, the World Professional Association of Transgender Healthcare. They also follow what's called the Dutch Protocol. That protocol and standards of care means the moment a child experiences gender dysphoria, all you do is affirm. You don't stop, you don't ask questions, you affirm, you use the pronouns they ask for, you use the names they ask for, all of that. Contrary to any other kind of therapy for any other kind of difficulty or difficulty, dysphoria, disorder. That's what I want. And so that path starts with the words, pronouns they choose, puberty blockers, which they will say, oh, just puts a pause on puberty. You could resume puberty just by pushing the play button, getting off the puberty blockers, and you'll resume it where you left off. There's no long-term consequences.
At what age does the medical transition begin with medication?
So medical affirmation begins when the patient says they're ready for it. So that could be a kiddo who is just starting puberty and panicking because they're getting breast buds or their penis is getting bigger and busier and they're worried about all kinds of masculine changes. And that way, puberty blockers, which are completely reversible and don't have permanent effects, are wonderful because we can put that pause on puberty. Just like if you were listening to music, you put the pause on and we stop the blockers and puberty would go right back to where it was. The next note in the song just delayed that period of time.
That is a lie. There's no long-term studies of puberty blockers except the ones that already exist where people have gone on them have shown very destructive consequences. I'll get to that. Puberty blockers, from there you go to hormone replacement therapy or what's called cross-sex hormones. So if you're a girl that wants to become a boy, that's called a FTM, a female to male transition. You're put on puberty blockers and then you are put on testosterone, which then changes your voice so you sound like a man, changes a lot of your characteristics, has very consequential long-term impacts like forever permanent infertility, permanent deep voice, a lot of things that can never be changed. And that leads to surgery. A lot of those interventions, they've thought, the story is that these transitions, these interventions, puberty blockers, HRT, surgeries, these were so that kids wouldn't kill themselves. But what they found in studies is that it was leading to greater suicides. It was not delivering on its promise. And so they saw, a lot of countries, they see that suicides increased with these interventions. So the Tavistock Clinic that was so big in England that did a lot of these initial studies, they shut down. and gender was given to like local clinics instead of this one gender affirming clinic because that's all they did. And they hid a lot of their data for 9 years showing the destructiveness of puberty blockers and kids that had gone on them. And they actually, in that very same clinic, discovered that 98%, all but one, of kids that they did in their initial study starting in 2011, the results of which were not produced until 2019, all but one of them went from puberty blockers to cross-sex hormones. So there was a direct transition. So Sweden, Finland, the UK, a lot of these countries now are starting to say, wait a minute, this whole affirmation model is not what we thought it was. In fact, Sweden did a study where not only did medical transition not cure people who had gender dysphoria, 20 times, it led to a 20 times multiple of people who actually committed suicide after getting this medical affirmation surgery, gender affirmation surgery, over the control group. 20 times. And so the problem is, why aren't doctors saying anything? Because doctors and parents, people who speak out and say, whoa, this whole transgender thing is very new. This treatment for it is very new. Let's just slow down and not rush into this. Anybody who says that is called a transphobe. They're canceled. They're banned from social media. They're denied tenure. They could even be incarcerated in some states or fired from their jobs, and they are often threatened with death because they are threatening the lives of trans kids by this surgery, or by telling them not to rush into this. They're threatening the lives of trans kids. That's the thing. For example, Dr. Kenneth Zucker, he was long acknowledged as a foremost authority on gender identity issues in children. He's also been a lifelong advocate for gay and transgender rights. However, much to the consternation of adult transgender activists, he didn't drink the Kool-Aid from the transgender cult. Instead, he believes that gender dysphoric prepubertal children are best served by helping them align their gender identity with their anatomical sex. This view ultimately cost him his 30-year directorship of the Child, Youth, and Family Gender Identity Clinic at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health in Toronto. On Reddit, there's a subreddit called dtrans/dtrans. It's a subreddit. It's a forum, online forum. In 2018, just 4 years ago, it had 100 followers. So, and doctors will say when brought up, well, what about these kids, all these people who are detransitioning? They went through transition, they realized it was a mistake. Sadly, many of them have gone further on and done irreversible harm to their bodies and their futures. And that's why I'm here speaking about this. They had a subreddit. There were 100 followers on it. Today, it has almost 40,000 followers, people sharing their stories about desisting or detransitioning. And in this transgender cult, there's a lot of abuse and manipulation. So let's talk about this fact, this idea that there's a 50% suicide rate. A girl at our youth group shared that the other day. And so if you knew as a parent that your child suddenly, they're telling you they're trans and you're told there's a 50% chance if they're not affirmed, they can kill themselves. When you either have a live trans son or a dead daughter, that is horribly abusive, and it puts you in a really, really bad position. Well, I'm telling you, these are bad studies. They're cherry-picked studies. They are not good, solid scientific studies. Good scientific studies do not exist on this topic, on affirmation. There hasn't even been enough time. But I'll show you what studies have shown in a minute. But they're based on self-selection. There's this project called the Trevor Project. There's Mermaids in the UK, these transgender things that promote the transgender ideology that are coming out with these studies. And they're studies like Facebook. They're interviewing people on Facebook, or they're sending studies out on Facebook. They are not scientific studies, and they shouldn't be believed. It doesn't even make sense. So let's ask some questions about the 50% statistic. Why have suicide rates in teens tripled in the last 15 years? This is from the Centers for Disease Control and Psychiatry Advisor. As affirmation acceptance have increased. In other words, affirmation and acceptance have increased. If affirmation is the model, why have suicides in these young people not decreased? They've increased. In fact, they've tripled in the ages of 10 to 14-year-old kids, 10 to 14-year-old girls, because it's impacting girls more than anyone else. Where were all the suicides 30 years ago when there was no affirmation? In fact, there's lots of kids that identify as trans or non-binary in schools today. Go back to your school. I graduated in 1992. Think of a single transgender person. I bet you can't. There were gay people, there were lesbian people, but now boys who might be gay or struggle with same-sex attraction, are a little more effeminate, and they're told they're girls. Imagine a gay boy realizing, oh, I'm not actually gay, I'm a girl. I mean, that's a much bigger pill to swallow. Or a lesbian or a butch girl or just a tomboy being told, oh, you're actually a boy, that's why you're acting this way. It's insane. So, and then why are those that go through gender affirming surgery 19 times more likely to commit suicide than their peers? This statistic doesn't even make sense, never mind the fact that it's based on bad studies. Now what if we just left well enough alone? We treated kids that say, oh, I'm trans, I'm non-binary, I'm struggling with a whole host of mental health issues. And what if we actually just treated them, cared for them, gave them therapy, but didn't affirm them? Well, 11 different studies show, you put them all together, 70 to 95% of children with gender dysphoria outgrow it. So if you do nothing, they outgrow this ideology. If you don't put them on puberty blockers and you let them go through puberty, they realize, okay, this was just a phase I went through. It's a process called desistance. In other words, you have these feelings and then you desist from these feelings. But if you put them on puberty blockers, you put them on a medical pathway that is very unlikely to be changed, with life-altering and very harmful effects. And in a lot of states, there's a conversion therapy ban. In other words, conversion therapy used to exist for gay people, where somebody would have same-sex attraction, and people believed, and I think actually there is some evidence to show that people can be converted, because I've personally known people that were gay and lesbian who are now happily married to someone of the opposite sex. And maybe they, to some degree, still struggle with same-sex attraction, but maybe they have both. I don't know. But they've used the same term, conversion therapy, and applied it to transgender. In other words, if somebody comes and visits you and says, I feel like I'm a boy, you have to, under penalty of fines or jail, you have to affirm them. If you say, wait, let's slow down, let's understand some of the trauma, let's understand maybe other things that you may be dealing with, depression, anxiety. There's a lot of comorbidities or diagnoses of autism for trans people, of depression for trans people, of anorexia for trans people, all of which, well, I'm not sure as much about autism, but depression, anorexia, ADHD, other things actually also have a higher suicide rate. So there's no idea to get to the bottom of, are trans people, supposedly people who identify as trans, killing themselves because of only that thing, isolated factor of not being affirmed in transition, or are there all the other psychological conditions that come along with it? Anyway, so they're forcing this affirmation model through government means on people who want to just give therapy to kids and help them through this. This is from Wikipedia that talks about, I looked up jurisdictions in the United States banning this supposed conversion therapy. By conversion therapy, again, that's just telling kids, a boy who comes in who says, I feel like I'm a girl, telling them, well, you're actually a boy. Let's help give you therapy and help your mind come around to the fact that you're a boy and that cannot be changed. That's called conversion therapy, and it's illegal in many states. So it says this is a list of jurisdictions in the U.S. banning conversion therapy. The pseudoscientific practice, oh, therapy is pseudoscientific now, of attempting to change an individual's sexual orientation, now that's debatable, or gender identity. Notice how they conflate the two and put them together, using psychological or spiritual interventions. A total of 25 states, as well as the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, and 100 municipalities, mostly located in Florida, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Minnesota, have banned that practice on minors. Penalties range from fines to imprisonment. DC is the only U.S. jurisdiction whose ban also applies to adults. So an adult who is having feelings of gender dysphoria cannot get therapy for that to align the way they're feeling and thinking with their biological reality. In some jurisdictions, bans on conversion therapy have been enjoined. That means they're being attacked, thank God, on First Amendment grounds. The Trevor Project, I referenced that before because they are very affirmation-oriented of transgender people, and they're promulgators of a lot of this 50% statistic that they say is like scientifically, they did a scientific study. No, they didn't. Is the largest movement in the world endeavoring to protect LGBTQ people from harmful sexual orientation and gender identity change efforts in every state of the nation and countries around the world. The American Psychological Association model, their model is not pushing back and taking time. It's 100% affirmation without questioning, dangerous puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and surgeries. You can get these untested medications. There is no process. In other words, if you want puberty blockers, if you as a child want puberty blockers, in many states, you don't even need your parents' permission to sign off on this. You can go to a Planned Parenthood, a wicked organization, racist organization. You can go to a clinic. You can go to a lot of places. You can maybe go to your school nurse. And without any therapy, without any discussion, you could fill out a little form and you could get puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones. You can get them that very day. The same day. Some people get them, you can get them over the phone, you can get them on the internet. They're very easy to get. But it's okay. It's just putting a pause. There's no long-term effects of these puberty blockers, so they say. So you can get on your first visit without looking at past trauma, not looking at other factors that may be involved in what you are going through and the distress that you're feeling, your anxiety, other psychological or disorders or depression. So the drug that is used for puberty blockers is called Lupron. Lupron is used, if you saw the movie by Matt Walsh, What is a Woman? Lupron is used for chemical castration of pedophiles. So people experiencing pedophilia, they are put on Lupron. That is what its intended use is, and it's also used for something called precocious puberty, which is kids like maybe 4 or 5 year olds, they have this disorder called precocious puberty, where puberty, they start growing hair, they start developing those secondary sex characteristics at very early ages. So they're put on Lupron as a measure to prevent this. Being used for transgenderism, being used to put a pause on normal age puberty is an off-label use. It is not approved by the FDA. And rather than not having harmful effects, 1,000 women, they did a study on Lupron. They reported a wide range of symptoms. Why are we not hearing this? Why are children not being told this? 30% cited severe joint pain, 29% severe body aches, 26% cracking teeth, and 20% reported osteoporosis. Why osteoporosis? Because as you grow and go through puberty, you grow quickly. You need more bone density as your bones are growing faster than they normally would. If you put a pause on your bone density growing along with your body growing, you're going to have brittle bones. This is really important. More than half reported moderate to life-threatening depression after going on the puberty blocker that was given to them to treat their suicidal ideation. More than half reported to moderate to life-threatening depression, but listen to this. 15% of the women, of the females, rated their suicidal thoughts as life-threatening to severe. Now, why would that be? A girl's going through struggles. She's getting hormones. She has hormones, estrogen. Her body's changing. And then, boom, you take her off estrogen and then you replace that with high doses of testosterone. One girl, Helena Kirshner, she shares the story of going to a gender clinic and was told, oh, well, okay, you have these feelings. We'll put you on 25 milligrams of testosterone. That's like the normal starting dose. She's like, well, I have wide hips. I have these things going on. What's the highest dose I can get? And they're like, well, the highest dose we give is 100. She says, I'll take that. And they give it to her that day. Imagine then, and she talks about the anger and the rage that she felt, the conflicting, all the emotions she felt while being on testosterone. A lot of women report the same things while they're on testosterone. They call it T. So if you listen to the stories and they use the word T, they're talking about being on testosterone and the suicidal thoughts that come along with not only puberty blockers, but also testosterone. Now, if they report back to their doctors all of these thoughts and all of these challenges that I'm having on puberty blockers, a lot of these gender affirming experts will tell them, well, that's because your puberty is blocked and you need to start the hormones that are going to switch you to the opposite gender. It's horrible. Puberty blockers are not simply a pause button while kids figure things out. They lead almost 100% of the time to cross-sex hormones, which cause permanent infertility and lack of sexual function and pleasure. Children who are not at an age where they can consent to sex can consent to never experiencing sexual pleasure, never experiencing breastfeeding, have the ability to have children. They are not at an age where they can make these decisions. The human brain does not stop developing until about the age of 25 or 26. People younger than that cannot understand the consequences that their decisions make. So this is a common diagram. It's called the gender spectrum. On the left, the most feminine possible side is Barbie. On the right, the most masculine side you would think would be me, but no, it's G.I. Joe. Or you might think of Rambo or Arnold Schwarzenegger or something like that. And kids are asked, and there's the gender unicorn, that's another BS one too. Where on the gender spectrum are you? Well, see, this is why this is so made up. Where on a spectrum might your gender identity be? There is no such thing as Barbie. Women have a wide range of femininity. Men have a wide range of masculinity. I cried at the end of Titanic. Does that mean I am not a man? No, I'm a man who may have some sensitivity at different times. Does that make me a woman? No. It means I'm a man, maybe I'm a 9 on the masculinity, femininity spectrum. This is gender traits, it's masculinity and femininity, but it doesn't change your gender. This is a tool that's used to just trick children into thinking, oh, well, I must be something else. I must not be a man or a woman. I'm non-binary. I'm a number 6. No, you are a man, you are a boy, or you are a girl, and you express it in different ways. The fact that you're a tomboy does not make you not a girl. The fact that you are a sensitive male does not make you not male. You are what you are. That cannot be changed. So there's a social contagion aspect. That's what this is. That's what this rapid onset gender dysphoria is. That's what this craze of transsexuality and gender identity and girls who don't know any better being rushed through this process, having their breasts removed, healthy breasts, that one day they might want to feed their children and bond with their children, that they will never have that opportunity to do because they've been sucked into this cult. It hurts women a lot more than men. Men don't care. They're not threatened by a woman going into their spaces. But women are vulnerable to men who can be predators. Not all of them are, but they could be. There should be spaces where just women can be women. There should be sports that are only for women, where a biological male cannot come in and start like taking their records and taking the wins that they have worked so hard their entire lives for. And gender ideology is completely nonsensical. In other words, as soon as, they'll say, well, what is a woman? Like, watch the movie by Matt Walsh. It's really, really good. What is a woman? Well, they can't say what is a woman. They can't define it. And so they'll have to say, well, a woman is whatever you feel like. That's it. You're reducing womanhood to just whatever. A man can be a woman. A biological male can be a woman. Like, being a woman doesn't mean anything. No, being a woman does mean something. God created men, male and female. He made women and men both in his image. Women are amazing. Women are powerful. It's so much better to align our minds with the truth. So they can't say what is a woman. The dictionary defines it as an adult human female. That's a spoiler alert. A woman is an adult human female. That's what a woman is. But they can't say that because they have to say trans women are women. But that's the funny thing, because they said gender ideology, gender identity, gender is a social construct. They separate gender as a social construct from biological reality of sex. But then they go back and say sex is socially constructed. It was your sex assigned at birth. There's no continuous continuity to it. Originally, they were saying very recently that gender was something that was completely fixed. In other words, a boy who thinks he's a girl was always a girl, just born in the wrong body. He's always felt that way. And in fact, kids are told, in order to get these drugs, if they get any kind of therapy at all or any kind of barriers to getting puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones at all, they are told the narrative to share that I've always felt this way. I've always known there was something wrong. And the problem is, a lot of kids, they know they feel wrong. They go through struggles. They feel like, I don't feel right. Why am I not like other people? You don't know what other people are like because you're not in their heads. You only see the outward expression of other people. But they're told in every case that it's because you have the wrong gender identity. And if there's transgender, can I be trans anything else? Anything else. Pick anything. Can I be trans anything else? Can I be trans race? Can I decide, can I feel like a black person, and does that make me a black person or anything else? Now, I believe race is a social construct. There is no actual difference. There's a human race and there's nothing else. I talked about that in another video, but can I be trans age? In other words, can I tell my doctor I feel like I'm 20? Does that make me 20? No, I'm a 48-year-old who might think I'm 20, the same as a man is still a man who might think he's a woman. Can I be trans species? Now there's furries, kids who identify as cats or wolves or all kinds of other things. They may think they are, but they are not, and affirming their delusion is not loving them. Can I be trans weight? I weigh about 270 right now. I lost 20 pounds, so that's good. Now, what if I want to go jump out of a plane and the parachute says, warning, 250-pound limit for this parachute? And I say, okay, I'll identify as 230 pounds. That doesn't work because there is such a thing as reality. Now, as Christians, think about this. We should treat all people with love and compassion, all people. But love does not necessarily equal affirmation. We should not automatically say, I affirm, and feel like we're being good people doing it. In fact, a lot of times affirmation, you are not doing it for the other person. You're doing it for yourself, for virtue signaling, for your own self-aggrandizement, to make yourself feel good, to let other people know that you are one of the good people, that I just affirm all things. You're doing it for yourself. It's ego. It's self-centered. You're not doing it for other people, because if you truly love other people, you will not affirm things that God says is not true, because God is love. When you say what God says, that is the most loving possible response. And when you deny what God says, that is not loving at all. It is not loving to go out of your way to offend people. In other words, if somebody says, oh, can you use she, her pronouns? I'm going to say, I will try to use the name that you're giving me. Because a name, I mean, people have nicknames. They ask to be called all kinds of things. Fine, I'll call you whatever name you want. Those are not necessarily aligned with a person's gender. But pronouns are. Pronouns, if you are a girl, a biological female, are she, her. If you're a biological male, they are he, him. And if that's what I know, that's what I'm going to use. But I would say I will do my best to use your name when talking about you in the third person instead of what I believe are the correct pronouns. I am not going to lie about your pronouns, even though I love you and I care about you, but I'm not going to lie about them because I love you and care about you, and I don't want to push you further down this dangerous, life-changing path that you're on. I don't believe loving you is doing that. I believe loving you is telling you the truth and caring about you through all of this. But that doesn't mean I'm going to go out of my way to misgender you or mispronoun you or say, did you see Steph? Maybe it's Steven who wants to be called Steph or Stephanie or something. Did you see Steph? I'm not going to go out of my way to be a jerk about it. But I should be more worried about offending God than offending people. And keep in mind, sometimes affirming someone can be harmful and destructive, even though it may feel good to do it, even though it feels good to go with the flow and do what everyone else is doing and not push back, not be called a transphobe, not be called names. But you know what? Better to be called names, speaking the truth and truly loving people than fake loving people and lying to them and affirming something that will end up destroying their lives. Proverbs 27:6 says this, wounds from a sincere friend are better than many kisses from an enemy. In other words, your friends may be the people that love you enough to tell you the truth, even when it's the truth you may not want to hear. Think of how volatile the teenage years are. Did you know what you wanted to be when you grew up? Most people didn't. Most people change. Most people go to college and don't graduate with what they initially went to college for. I mean, that's not life-changing, changing your major in college. What is life-changing is deciding at 13, 14, 17, 18, whatever age, before your brain is fully developed, to be sterile, infertile, and have surgeries. If you start hormone injections, you have to take hormone injections for the entire rest of your life. Wounds from a sincere friend are better than many kisses from an enemy. Maybe the person who is affirming is not a friend, but truly an enemy. Remember, there is biological reality. People are either male or female. It is better to change a person's feelings and mind to conform with reality than vice versa. Gender is an expression that was made up by John Money, but it's an expression of your biological reality. You could have masculinity and femininity. Those things are a spectrum, but they do not change biological reality. You could be a man who might have a little more feminine characteristics. You might be a man who likes having long hair. Great. Knock yourself out. You're still a man. You might be a man who likes wearing makeup or jewelry or dresses or things like that, but you're still a man who likes doing those things. That doesn't make you a woman. The same reason black people get offended when white people might wear blackface or take on cultural appropriation. You cannot appropriate another gender. You will never, as a male, go through the experiences and know the experience of being a female. Only women do that. It's hard being, I can't tell you from personal experience, only what I know. It is hard being a female. You don't get to appropriate, skip all of their struggles of having periods and puberty and all of that stuff and then just call yourself a woman. You're not. And then the purpose of psychotherapy, any kind of therapy I've ever seen, is to align the mind with the truth. So if somebody has OCD, they could have all kinds of delusions. They have weird feelings, obsessions that repeat themselves in their minds until they give in. They're compelled to do something. So they might touch a surface with one hand, and then in their mind, it won't stop that they have to touch the surface with another hand. They don't have to, but they feel like they have to. I've read books on it, and I know somebody that I love with OCD. Now, if they get therapy, what if the therapist told them, well, if you don't touch the thing with the other hand, something terrible is going to happen. You have to. They affirm their obsessive thoughts. That wouldn't happen. Somebody with arachnophobia, maybe they're afraid to leave the house because there might be a spider outside. Hopefully a therapist would tell them the truth and say, there's maybe spiders around, but they can't hurt you. Anyway, I mean, there's black widows. Those are more deadly. Brown recluse spiders are usually not deadly. But around here, we don't have those kinds of spiders, maybe down south. But they wouldn't affirm your fear and say, yeah, there's spiders everywhere. You better, in fact, lock your bedroom door and hide under your bed. They wouldn't affirm your arachnophobia. What about schizophrenia? You're hearing voices? Yeah, those voices are real. Schizophrenia is associated with a high suicide rate. Should you then affirm their false beliefs and false thoughts? Or psychosis, they're seeing things that aren't there. Should you say they're real? If somebody has paranoia, do you say, yeah, they really are out to get you? If somebody's struggling with anorexia, they think they have to starve themselves and keep losing weight. When they see their body, they have body image issues. Should you say, yeah, you are fat? You should get liposuction. There is no delusion that we affirm in people. Why is this one different? Because it's based on an ideology and activism and not really caring for people. So that's about it. That's why I don't believe Christians, and I don't believe anyone who loves people and loves young people should affirm them. And I think more people have to be equipped with the true knowledge about what is really going on. This video is the tip of the iceberg. I've done so much research into this. Go read. You can go on YouTube and watch detransition stories of people who went through this, got sucked into this ideological cult, and have made irreversible decisions to their bodies. Read the book Irreversible Damage by Abigail Shrier. It is powerful. And start questioning this narrative, the suicide narrative, the narrative that it's loving to be affirming and all of that, because it ain't. Thank you for watching. Pray for our children that are going through this difficult time. They need it. Bye.